Darren called later than he ever did, his name flashing on my phone while I was sorting a small stack of bills at the kitchen table. The moment I answered, his tone hit me first, tight-clipped, like he'd rehearsed the whole thing. "Dad, you're not a fit for the image I'm building. I need you to stay home for Thanksgiving this year." Those words landed fast. My hand froze over an envelope. A breath came measured because raising my voice never helped with him. "What image are you talking about?" "A lot of people will be there," he said. "It'll get awkward if you show up." He didn't try to soften it, didn't bother with details. Just that. Awkward. "So you're telling me not to come?" "That's what I'm saying. No apology, no hesitation." The line carried nothing else, so I ended the call before I said something I'd regret. The kitchen hummed with the usual nighttime noises, but his words stayed sharper than anything around me. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from my niece, Amber Uncle Howard. "Are you coming to the dinner?" Heard Darren's stressed about that political event. He wants everything perfect. Perfect? That was the word that pushed me back in my chair. Darren never used to care about perfect. He cared about getting by, doing enough, keeping people impressed just long enough to feel important. This felt different, calculated in a way he hadn't been when he was younger. Amber's message rolled through my mind. Someone must have heard something. People in this town talk: church groups, co-workers, old neighbors. If he'd been saying things about me that would travel fast. My eyes drifted to the window before I caught myself and looked away. No point thinking about the view. What mattered was the pattern forming: a sun shaping a story, trimming whatever didn't match the version he wanted to present on that stage he kept chasing. The chair creaked as I stood. A small step from the table to the counter felt heavier than it should. Darren's voice kept repeating in my head, each replay harder than the last. "You're not a fit." The phrasing struck me as something he'd picked up from campaign staff, one of those lines meant to keep a narrative clean. He hadn't talked to me like a son in that call, more like a manager fixing a loose piece of equipment. The phone stayed in my hand for a long moment. I thought about calling him back, asking what pushed him there, whether someone told him to distance himself. Instead, the device slipped into my pocket. Questions never answered themselves, and he rarely gave straight ones anyway. A few messages from co-workers sat unread, reminders about shift changes and tool requests, but none of it held my attention. The only thing running through my mind was how fast Darren had delivered that line, how sure he sounded when he cut me out. The shift at the shop started an hour after Darren hung up on me, so I grabbed my jacket and headed out. The drive east felt longer than usual, though the route never changed. Work helped keep the mind from drifting, or at least that was the hope. Wrenches, bolts, engines, simple things that didn't twist themselves into knots. By the time I clocked in, a few guys were already elbow-deep in a broken transit bus. Someone asked for a hand with a jammed housing. Routine steps followed, but concentration wavered more than I wanted to admit. During a short break, Carl wandered over. He'd known Darren from a summer volunteer project years back, and liked bringing that up whenever he could. He tore open a bag of chips and said, "Hey, I heard your kid's prepping some big speech, something about having to rise above family hardship." He mentioned a father who's not all there anymore. That part sounded a little heavy. The wrench slipped in my grip. "What did he say exactly?" "Nothing detailed," Carl answered. "Just that his dad lost clarity over the years. Made it tough for him." A strange pressure settled at the base of my neck. No version of Darren's childhood matched what Carl described. He said that's how it came across. The man kept talking, but the words turned soft in the background. Darren telling anyone I'd lost clarity didn't line up with anything I'd ever heard from him, not even during his worst moods. Carl eventually shrugged and moved on to another topic, unaware of the weight he'd dropped on me. The break ended, and people returned to their stations. Tools clanged, machines powered up, and conversations scattered across the floor. None of it mattered anymore. That single line from Darren's speech dug itself deeper with each passing minute. When the shift wrapped up, exhaustion wasn't what pushed me toward the parking lot. A different kind of pull took over, something sharper, restless. Milwaukee sat about an hour away, and Marcia Alvarez worked there. She'd never been close to me, but sometimes distance makes honesty easier. Her apartment was near an older brick building where she often parked her car, so we met in that spot first. She stepped out wearing a jacket too thin for the cold, brushing hair away from her face when she saw me. "You look worn out," she said. "Long night," I replied. "I need your perspective on something." We walked to a small diner nearby, sliding into a booth. No menus required. She ordered black coffee, and I just asked for water. After explaining what Darren said on the phone and what Carl repeated to me, her eyebrows drew together. "That's not casual exaggeration," she said. "When someone wants to shape a story, they start rewriting the people around them. It's easier than admitting the truth isn't dramatic enough." That's not Darren. Maybe not the Darren you knew. The statement pushed something in my chest. She wasn't attacking him, just stating what she'd seen over years covering political campaigns and public figures. Her tone eased as she added, "You should check anything he might have left behind. Emails, documents, notes, whatever paints the fuller picture." A truck rumbled past the window, rattling the silverware. She took a sip of coffee and waited for my answer. "What am I supposed to do if he really said all that?" "Figure out how far he's willing to go. Then decide how far you're willing to let him." The conversation paused there. No moral lecture, no advice about forgiveness, just facts. Before leaving the diner, she placed a hand on my sleeve. "Howard, don't brush this off. People rewrite family stories all the time for publicity. If he's using yours, you deserve to know." The drive home felt heavier than the road usually allowed. My house stayed the same, tools near the entry stack of jackets on the chair, but my mind wouldn't settle. Nothing about this matched the Darren who used to ask me to check his homework at the kitchen table. In the hall closet, an old laptop leaned against a box of holiday decorations. Darren used it during college before upgrading. The thing barely held a charge, but after plugging it in and waiting, the screen flickered alive. Folders lined the desktop. One of them, labeled Drafts, held files dated within the past month. A double click opened a document titled Family Narrative, Revision. A paragraph near the middle caught me immediately. My father lost his sense of reality years ago. I had to step forward and carry the weight of our household before I was ready. The words blurred at first, then sharpened in a way that made my fingers tighten around the side of the laptop. That wasn't exaggeration, that was fabrication. Every sentence claimed I was drifting, confused, unable to function. None of it true. A breath worked its way out of me slowly, though it felt rough at the edges. The room felt still, without even a hum from the heater to break the strain. My hand stayed on the laptop, knuckles pale. The file on Darren's laptop stayed burned into my thoughts long after the screen dimmed. By mid-morning, the weight of it pushed me back toward Milwaukee. The roads carried a steady stream of holiday traffic, yet the miles slipped by with almost no sense of movement. When the exit signs for the city appeared, my grip tightened around the folder holding the printed draft of Darren's speech. Marcia met me near the same diner as before. She waved me into a booth, then waited while I slid the pages across the table. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph without a word. Halfway down the page, her jaw set. "This isn't a slip-up," she said. "He's rewriting everything I answered." She tapped the margin. "These phrases aren't accidental." Lost clarity. Emotional decline. I had to step forward. "This is crafted to pull sympathy. Politicians use family narratives like scaffolding. He's building one and you're the support beam. You think he planned this planned, revised, polished. This isn't harmless? Marcia set the papers aside and rested her hands together, studying me. A small part of me hoped she'd tell me it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, she spoke with the same calm certainty she brought to every tough story she covered. You don't fit the version he wants to present. So he's creating a new one. Before I could respond, my phone chimed. An email notification flashed on the screen, an automatic forward from an old account Darren once linked to mine for convenience, back when he was in high school. The subject line read, "Interview prep, the father I had to rise above." My stomach tightened. The email mentioned that a local newspaper was planning a feature on Darren's upbringing with a struggling parent, and they wanted a soft, emotional angle. The reporter suggested scheduling a photo shoot where Darren could reflect on the hardships that built his resilience. Marcia leaned over when she saw the look on my face. "What is it?" I handed her the phone. She scanned the message and exhaled slowly. So it's already spreading. The room shifted around me. Not visually, just the sense that something solid had given way. A story told once can be corrected. A story prepared for publication picks up speed. A thought crept in that I didn't want to acknowledge. Maybe my distance over the years, my long hours, my habit of keeping to myself unless something needed fixing, had left space for Darren to fill in whatever narrative benefited him. Maybe silence had looked like absence. What if he believes some of this? I asked. Marcia shook her head. "Howard, you go to work every day. Handle your life, pay bills, keep your home together. You're not fading, you're functioning. The truth sits right in front of you. Don't let him talk the world into another version. That's my son." "I know. That's why this hits harder. But if you say nothing, the public will assume what he says is accurate. People accept the first version they hear." The waitress dropped off our drinks. We paused while she refilled a nearby table. Then Marcia lowered her voice. "You need to decide how much control you're willing to give him, because right now he's shaping your character in a story meant to serve his ambitions." Her words settled uneasily. Fighting Darren wasn't something I ever imagined doing. Every instinct leaned toward staying out of his way, letting him build whatever life he thought he needed. But letting him narrate my downfall to boost his credibility felt different wrong in a way that scraped at me. We finished our drinks without much conversation. She walked with me to the door. "Check every file he left behind," she said. "And Howard? Be ready for the possibility that this goes further." Driving back toward Madison, I stopped at a service station off the interstate for fuel. A group of travelers clustered near the entrance, talking as I stepped out. Their voices carried easily over the parking lot. "Darren Keene's event should be huge," one of them said. "Yeah, I heard he's got some emotional family angle. Something about overcoming a tough household. Politicians eat that stuff up. Each line lodged deeper than the last. Not because strangers were talking about Darren, but because they were discussing a father. I didn't recognize a shadow version of me that he'd apparently introduced to the world." The fuel pump clicked off, and I tightened the cap before heading toward my truck. The keys sat warm in my palm. That group kept talking behind me, unaware of the man standing a few steps away, whose entire life they'd just reduced to a dramatic anecdote. The folder with Darren's draft lay on the passenger seat. I slid behind the wheel but didn't start the engine right away. The pages in my lap carried a story that wasn't mine, shaped by someone who once trusted me to fix his school projects, teach him how to change a tire, pick him up when he called. The shop ran on its usual rhythm, metal striking metal, brief conversations traded between repairs, the steady pulse of work that filled most evenings. A few hours into the shift, my phone buzzed on the bench. The name on the screen belonged to Mark Jensen, a former security guard I'd known since he worked events around Madison. His message read, "Saw Darren's list." He added a note, Do not allow Howard Keene into the event area. Thought you should know. The stool scraped against the concrete as I stood. A line crossed in a way that hit differently from the rest. Being asked to stay home was one thing. Having my name placed on an exclusion list felt like erasing me altogether. Another text arrived from Marcia before I could respond to Mark. She'd forwarded a file, a draft of an article scheduled to run in Milwaukee. The headline hit hard: A Son's Burden. Caring for a father. Losing his grip on reality. Not one part of it matched my life. The opening paragraph described Darren's resilience in guiding a parent through confusion and emotional decline. The way the sentences were crafted, anyone reading them would believe he'd carried me through years of struggle. A knot formed low in my chest. Every line cast me as someone slipping away, someone Darren had to protect and rise above. It painted a portrait so far from the truth that anger and disbelief tangled together. Marcia called a moment later. "This is the version they want to publish," she said. "The editor thinks it's powerful." "Powerful for who, not you," she replied. "And definitely not the truth." The call ended and I scrolled through the draft again. Words meant to stir charity and admiration for Darren curled around my name like vines choking off anything real. The further I read, the less I recognized the father described there. Another vibration reached my pocket. This time it came from an unknown number with a brief message. "This leaked in our newsroom group chat. Thought you should see it." Attached was a screenshot. The picture showed a snippet of the article along with a comment written above it. "This old guy probably doesn't even know what's going on." A short laugh escaped me, not from humor, but disbelief. Strangers in a group chat now speculated about my mental state based on a story Darren manufactured. The shift from personal betrayal to public distortion arrived faster than I could absorb. Someone asked for help on a stalled gearbox across the room, so I walked over and handed them a tool. The motion felt automatic, with half my focus on the job and half still locked on the murmurs of those reporters. Being turned into a cautionary tale wasn't something I ever imagined. None of it felt earned. None of it felt connected to me at all. Back at my bench, I lifted the phone again. The screen still displayed the screenshot, the comment hanging above my name, like a badly placed label. My thumb hovered over Darren's contact. One part of me wanted answers, wanted to demand an explanation, or at least force him to say the words directly rather than scatter them through drafts, speeches, and reporters. Another part knew any conversation would twist itself into something worse. He'd deny it, defend the strategy, or insist it was being taken out of context. The line between reaching out and holding back thinned, but the call didn't happen. The phone stayed in my hand without moving toward my ear. A coworker walked past asking if I wanted a soda from the vending machine. I shook my head, barely catching his comment before he disappeared toward the hallway. The shop continued around me, steady in its routine, while I drifted in a direction I couldn't fully articulate. Marcia sent a final message for the night: "Keep that draft. Don't delete anything. This is bigger than you think." I didn't reply. The phone set itself down on the bench, face down, though the urge to flip it over returned every few seconds. None of this felt real enough to sit with, yet every line of text argued otherwise. Eventually, I picked up the file again and opened the leaked article for a second time. The usual noise of the machines carried across the room, their hum threading through the pause between one breath and the next. My eyes returned to the paragraph describing the father fading from the world, a man who needed someone to guide him through daily life. The drive toward Lake Mendota stretched longer than usual, though the roads were nearly empty. Not much separated the city from the water, yet every mile felt weighted. When the shoreline finally appeared through the breaks between buildings, I pulled into a narrow turnout facing the lake and cut the engine. The folder of drafts slid onto the passenger seat, spilling a few pages onto the floor. Reading them again brought no comfort. The same language repeated through every document Darren touched. Loss of clarity, difficulty making decisions, emotional decline. Terms chosen with precision repeated often enough to become a theme. They formed a portrait of a man losing control of his own life, a man Darren claimed he'd had to protect. The line about diminished decision-making appeared in 3 different drafts. Another line suggested I relied heavily on Darren for everyday tasks. Anyone who saw me hauling equipment around the shop would laugh at that. But this wasn't written for people who knew me. This was crafted for crowds who'd never met either of us. A vibration cut through the car. Marcia's name lit up the screen. I answered, and she didn't waste a second. "The article just got approved," she said. "They'll run it in 48 hours. My eyes drifted to the lake. "So this is happening." "It is," she replied. "Unless something forces them to pause." The call ended with no comfort. Fingers tightened around the phone before setting it down. A heaviness rolled over my shoulders, familiar in a way I didn't like. Years of sidestepping conflict came back all at once. Memories of keeping the peace when Darren and his mother argued, memories of letting small things slide because saying something felt like adding fuel to a fire. Staying quiet had always seemed like the safer path. Less shouting, fewer slammed doors, a way to keep the house from splintering. Over time, though, that habit had turned into something else, letting people assume whatever they wanted as long as the day ended without another fight. Maybe Darren had learned from that silence. Maybe he mistook it for weakness. A new email arrived from an address tied to Darren's campaign team. The subject line read, "Event Coordination. Family Notes." My pulse picked up when I opened it. Darren wrote, "My family agrees Dad needs rest. He won't be attending. Please respect that boundary." Another punch. Another confirmation that he'd been telling people a version of me that didn't belong to my life. He was presenting the story as unanimous as if relatives sat around a table and voted me unfit for a public gathering. The urge to give up curled around my ribs. Showing up at that event meant walking straight into a room where Darren had already painted me as someone unstable. Strangers would watch every move, analyze every hesitation. Anything less than perfect composure would be used to confirm his narrative. He'd built a trap that ran in both directions. Leaning back, I let out a long breath. None of this was what I wanted. Not confrontation, not spectacle, not becoming the center of Darren's political myth. The lake stayed still, offering no answers. Thoughts tangled, memories, doubts, the urge to let everything fall the way Darren wanted. But then an image surfaced, my coworkers relying on me during breakdowns, friends who trusted my judgment, neighbors who waved whenever I helped jump their cars in the winter. My life wasn't some drifting shadow Darren described. It had weight, structure, purpose. The car door creaked when I finally pushed it open. A short walk took me toward a small clearing where a student group was assembling metal frames for a temporary stage. Their voices carried easily in the open space. A young man adjusted a banner while talking to someone beside him. "His speech is supposed to be emotional this time," he said. "Something about his dad, I think." Another replied, "Yeah, I heard it's pretty touching." Those words landed like a final warning. Darren hadn't just told a story, he'd spread it far enough that strangers around a lake were expecting to be moved by it. They didn't talk about corruption, or ambition, or opportunism. They talked about the story he sold them. A story with me at the center, broken down for dramatic effect. My steps drifted toward the wooden platform near the water. Not far from it, a line of ropes marked the boundary of the setup area. One of the students nodded at me, then kept tightening a fixture. None of them recognized me. They had no reason to. They only knew the version Darren crafted. The ground sloped gently toward a set of steps leading up to the platform. I paused there, holding onto the railing without thinking. From that angle, the stage looked half-built, waiting for the final touches before the event. A few pieces of equipment gleamed on the grass left temporarily, while students moved planks into position. Something in that unfinished scene pressed against me. The lake reflected a muted version of the structure, stretching the shapes into long, wavering lines. The world around me felt like it was pushing for a decision: move away or step further into what Darren created. My fingers tightened around the railing. The file folder tucked under my arm shifted, brushing my side. The students kept working, talking about deadlines and sound checks. Their conversation pulled at me, making it clear how far Darren's story had traveled and how little control remained. Marcia asked me to meet her at the Milwaukee newsroom early the next day. She didn't give details, only said it couldn't wait. The drive there felt stretched thin each mile, adding something heavier to my chest. When I stepped into the lobby, she was already waiting near the elevators, arms crossed, foot tapping a nervous rhythm. "We need to talk somewhere private," she said, leading me down a hallway toward a small conference room. Once the door shut, she opened her laptop and pulled out a pair of headphones. "A source from Darren's team sent this," she said. No name, no explanation, just the file. Her hand hovered over the play button for a second. "You should hear it." I slipped on the headphones. The audio clicked on with the sound of shuffling papers, chairs, moving a few murmurs. Then Darren's voice cut through. "My father's sharper than most people my age, but a sadder story gets more traction. If folks think I've pulled myself up from hardship, it hits better." He laughed lightly after saying it. The room around me faded. The headphones went still in my hands, yet Darren's voice kept echoing. Hearing him confess that I was fully capable, then choosing the version where he could milk sympathy, hit harder than every article draft or rumor combined. I handed the headphones back slowly. He admitted it. "Yes," Marcia said. "This is direct evidence he fabricated the narrative." She closed the laptop but kept her eyes fixed on me. "You can use this," she added, "or you can leave it alone. That choice belongs to you." Her voice stayed steady. The words weren't a push, they were an open door. A part of me wanted to take comfort in the proof. Another part felt sick, hearing my son speak so casually about twisting my life into a prop. He wasn't some stranger leveraging a story. He was the boy who once asked me to help him build a birdhouse in the garage, the teenager who begged for extra time behind the wheel before getting his license. How could he pick the easier version of me, the tragic one, so easily? Marcia studied me for a moment. "Howard, I know it hurts. But you're not imagining this." Before I responded, a newsroom assistant knocked on the door. "Sorry to interrupt. This came through PR channels," she said, handing Marcia a printed release. Marcia scanned it first, then passed it to me. Darren had issued a formal statement to the press. "My father stepped back from our family years ago. His distance shaped me into the person I am today. I carry both the sorrow and the strength from that history as I move forward in public service. Not lost clarity this time, something worse. A rewriting of history that turned absence into motive. He turned me into a background character in his redemption arc." My hand tightened around the page, the edges creasing under my grip. For a moment, everything felt oddly light, as if the air was thinner. Marcia's voice softened. "They're distributing it statewide. It's already on 2 local websites." A few reporters walked past the open doorway. Their laughter drifted down the hall unrelated to us, yet it made the moment feel even smaller, like the truth of my life was slipping unnoticed into the machinery of the news cycle. I stepped into the hallway, document still in my hand. Settling onto a bench outside the conference room, I stared at the words Darren wrote. My thumb pressed so hard into the paper that it left a small indentation. A few questions rose uninvited. Had I been distant? Had I worked too many late hours? Had Darren misunderstood my silence all these years? A man can shoulder a lot without explaining it, but that doesn't mean others see it as strength. Still, none of that matched what Darren claimed. Distance wasn't desertion, and responsibility wasn't confusion. He'd packaged pieces of truth with fiction until even I had trouble sorting where one ended and the other began. Sitting there, I realized something else. If I didn't show up publicly, Darren's version would become the default. People wouldn't check facts. They'd accept the narrative, repeat it, build it into a foundation he'd stand on for years. Marcia stepped out from the conference room and sat beside me. This recording changes everything she said. But it's not my place to release it. It's yours. The recording, the statement, the articles. All of it rested in my jacket pocket like something hot enough to burn through fabric. I stood slowly. The hallway stretched ahead, filled with people moving between desks, phones ringing, printers spitting out pages. Life in the newsroom carried on in its usual current, unaware of the storm forming at my back. Whatever you decide, Marcia said, don't decide out of fear. No answer came. I managed only a small nod before stepping away. The automatic doors opened as I reached the exit. Air swept across me, cold enough to pull me fully back into myself. One hand drifted into my pocket fingers, brushing the small flash drive Marcia had given me with the recording. The day of Darren's event arrived faster than I expected. Marcia picked me up near the shop, and we rode the last stretch into Madison without much talk. She rehearsed nothing, didn't coach me on what to say. Her silence told me she trusted I'd handle things my own way. As we neared the convention center, the sidewalks filled with people wearing badges, lanyards, and the kind of rushed determination that surrounds political gatherings. A line of volunteers directed guests toward the main entrance. Reporters clustered near the doors, checking equipment and comparing notes. The noise carried a restless energy. "We split here," Marcia said. "If we walk in together, someone will start guessing." She slipped into a small crowd of journalists before I could reply. A moment later, she was already greeting a familiar face, blending in with the rest. I stepped through a different set of doors, handing my ID to a staffer who barely glanced at it before waving me forward. The hallway opened to a series of displays showing Darren's campaign messaging. Large posters lined the walls, each one framing him as a survivor of a fragmented upbringing. Words like hardship, perseverance, and family struggle jumped out from every angle. A smaller sign read, "He rose from a broken foundation and built a better future." A sting worked its way down my spine. A few volunteers walked by carrying clipboards. One pointed toward a staging room and said, "They want Darren in position 5 minutes early." The story is hitting hard. People are connecting with the childhood angle. Hearing that tightened something deep in my chest. His story wasn't connecting, it was spreading. Further down the hall, a pair of reporters caught my eye. One of them approached cautiously. "Sir, are you with the Keene family?" he asked. "I'm Howard," I said. His brows lifted just a little. "As in Darren's father?" "That's right." A second reporter stepped closer. "We weren't expecting you." "No reason you should have," I said. "I'm here to watch, same as anyone else." They glanced at one another before the first spoke again. "May we ask why you came to hear my son speak?" I answered. "And to be clear about who I am." They hesitated, unsure how far to push. That small pause helped settle me. "I work full-time," I continued. "Pay my bills. I manage my own life. There's been talk suggesting otherwise, and I want people to judge for themselves, not off rumors. One of them scribbled notes. The other watched me carefully, not suspicious, just curious. They didn't press for drama. They didn't ask me to defend myself. They let my words sit how they were. Marcia appeared briefly in the distance, speaking to two reporters she seemed to know well. The way she leaned in told me she was planting seeds, nothing flashy, just enough to redirect attention. I caught only one sentence as I passed by. There's more to the family story than what's been shared. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Staff members hurried through the hall, checking badges, adjusting equipment, whispering last-minute updates. The air carried a nervous rhythm. Darren was close by. I could sense it without seeing him. Near the backstage entrance, one of his aides muttered, "His dad's out here somewhere." The whisper wasn't meant for me, but it drifted through the noise. A beat later, Darren came around the corner adjusting his jacket while listening to instructions. His steps slowed when he heard the aide. "My dad," he repeated. "He's in the hall," the aide confirmed. That single sentence drained the color from Darren's face. He scanned the crowd, searching for me. I didn't move, didn't raise a hand, didn't try to get his attention. Standing still felt like the only way to keep the moment from turning into something loud. Two reporters intercepted him before he reached the stage entrance. "Mr. Keene," one said, "your father seems perfectly capable. Would you like to clarify the claims in your draft speech?" Darren blinked, taken off guard. Well, those lines were early notes not intended." Another reporter stepped in, holding a small recorder. "Before you continue, we've received audio from your internal meeting. It contradicts several statements you made." His mouth opened slightly, but no words followed. A ripple moved through the group as more journalists approached. The aide beside Darren stiffened, then reached for his phone. Someone further behind whispered, "This isn't good." Questions flew faster than Darren could form a single answer. "Did you exaggerate your father's condition? Is the narrative of hardship fabricated? Were you planning to use false emotional framing in tonight's speech?" The hallway swelled with movement. Assistants tried to usher Darren toward the stage, but reporters blocked their path. A few staff members argued with journalists. Someone raised their voice about protocol. Another staffer grabbed a clipboard and tried to redirect the crowd. I stayed back, leaning slightly against the wall. Nothing about this felt triumphant. It felt necessary. Marcia caught sight of me from across the chaos. She didn't smile. She simply gave one small nod, the kind that said, "Let the truth run its course." A staff member tried to steer Darren into the staging area, but the reporters pressed harder, waving the transcript of the recording. Darren's face tightened. His hands trembled where he held his briefing notes. The noise swelled as more people joined the commotion. Questions layered over each other. Staff protested. Reporters insisted. Volunteers froze in place, unsure whether to help or stay out of the way. The stage lights beyond the curtain shifted colors, cycling faster than normal. Someone tested a microphone, creating a burst of feedback that cut through the crowd. Event staff ushered me into a small meeting room once the program collapsed under the pressure of too many questions. Chairs sat scattered, as if the last group rushed out. A campaign lawyer waited at the table, holding a thin stack of papers. His expression stayed tight, but he remained professional. "We need your signature confirming the recording came from Ms. Alvarez," he said, "and that you didn't produce or manipulate it." I glanced over the document. "That's accurate." He slid a pen toward me. The signature line felt heavier than it should have. After signing, I pushed the stack back, and the lawyer gave a brisk nod before stepping out. The room emptied, leaving only the fading echo of the chaos that had erupted minutes earlier. My hands rested on my knees for a moment, steadying themselves. No victory rush came, no sense of triumph, just a quiet understanding settling through my chest. Years of silence had allowed Darren to carve out a version of me that fit his ambitions better than the real man ever could. For so long, I'd believed that keeping the peace protected the family. That speaking up only made things worse. But the absence of my voice had given him room to rewrite me, trimming away facts and replacing them with scenes that never happened. In my effort to avoid conflict, I'd left blank pages he felt entitled to fill. Someone knocked lightly on the doorframe. A campaign aide leaned in. "They've suspended Darren while they review everything," she said. "Interviews are canceled. The article's being pulled. They're reconsidering his role in the race." Her discomfort showed in how she shifted her weight. Sympathy wasn't what she was offering. Protocol required her to inform me, nothing more. I nodded. "Thank you," I said. She disappeared before adding anything else. My phone buzzed the moment she left. One new message from Darren. "Dad, we need to talk. Please." The words lingered on the screen longer than they needed to. My thumb hovered not out of hesitation, but because any reply would pull me back into the narrative he created. He wasn't reaching out to mend things. Not yet. His timing made that clear. The message dimmed when the screen timed out. I set the phone face down on the table and didn't touch it again. Leaving the building felt easier than stepping into it. The air hit my face sharp enough to wake every part of me that had been dulled by the last few days. Volunteers stood in clusters outside gossiping about the event falling apart. Nobody looked twice at me. By the time I reached my truck, the sun had dipped low, stretching the afternoon toward evening. I drove back to Madison without turning on the radio. Silence wasn't avoidance this time. It was space to breathe. Work waited the next morning, same schedule, same tools, same stack of service tickets clipped to the wall. Returning to it felt natural. I clocked in, grabbed my gear, and joined the team checking a bus lift that had stalled during the night. Someone asked, "You good, Howard?" "Doing all right," I said. They accepted that without digging. These men knew how to read each other. If a guy didn't want to talk, they didn't force him. That unspoken code had held our crew together for years. During lunch break, while the others argued about football scores, I pulled out my phone and signed up for a weekend hiking group at Devil's Lake. I'd talked about doing something like that for years, but always found excuses: too tired, too busy, maybe next season. Now the idea felt less like an escape and more like reclaiming a piece of myself that had slipped away. The confirmation email came through seconds later. Another notification arrived as I stood near the tool racks. Marcia had sent a short message. "You put the truth back where it belonged." My reply was simple. "Thank you." She didn't follow up, and I didn't expect her to. Some moments don't need extra commentary. The day moved along the way any other day would. Equipment failed and got repaired. People joked, cursed, and argued about the best brands of power tools. By the end of the shift, my gloves were blackened from grease and dust. After the final checklist, I peeled them off and tossed them into my locker. The metal door clanked lightly when it shut. A small breeze drifted through the open loading bay. Nothing symbolic about it, just air moving where it always did. I slung my jacket over one shoulder and headed toward the lot. Trucks lined the row, most of them dented or rusted along the edges. Mine sat near the far end. Each step across the concrete eased the knotted tension that had lived in my chest for far too long. The story Darren tried to craft no longer held ownership of my name. Whatever came next, hiking trails, long shifts, quiet evenings, I'd face it without letting anyone else write it for me. I reached my truck, unlocked the door, and climbed in. The engine hummed to life beneath my hands as I prepared to pull out of the lot.